Rain tapped softly against the glass walls of Denver's tallest biotech tower, while security monitors cast a cold blue glow across the control room. A former Navy SEAL and his loyal German Shepherd were finishing what should have been an ordinary night shift. One unexpected security alert, one half-open executive office door, one glimpse of a billionaire CEO covered in bruises, bandages, and a hidden medical brace. That was all it took for a routine patrol to uncover a secret someone was willing to kill to protect. Before we begin, please support us to reach 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. A cold rain drifted across downtown Denver, turning the glass towers into blurred pillars of silver and shadow. Ryan Carter had always preferred nights. During his years as a Navy SEAL, darkness had been a companion rather than an enemy. It hid danger, but it also revealed it to those patient enough to watch. Even after leaving the military, that habit never disappeared. At 35, Ryan still carried himself like a man who expected trouble around every corner. Ryan. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with a short, dark, military haircut, a neatly trimmed beard, and calm gray-blue eyes that rarely missed anything. Most people who met him assumed he was intimidating. The truth was that Ryan had become quieter after losing several teammates overseas. Years of conflict had taught him that strength was often measured by restraint. Beside him walked Max, a 6-year-old German Shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and alert amber eyes. Max moved with the confidence of a veteran professional. The dog had served alongside Ryan in difficult places around the world and had developed an almost uncanny ability to sense danger before it appeared. Employees entering Harrington Biotech often greeted Max before they greeted Ryan. The headquarters of Harrington Biotech rose 50 stories above downtown Denver. During the day, the building buzzed with scientists, executives, investors, and lawyers. At night, however, the place felt different. The polished hallways became eerily quiet, and the expensive artwork seemed to watch from the walls. Ryan checked the security monitors in the command center shortly after 10 o'clock. Everything appeared normal until a red notification flashed across one of the screens. Restricted access alert. Executive floor. Ryan frowned. The alert originated from the top floor, where only a handful of people had clearance. Most employees had already gone home hours earlier. "You see that too, buddy?" Ryan asked. "This." Max's ears immediately stood upright. Ryan grabbed his radio and headed for the elevator. Years of training had taught him that small anomalies often became major problems when ignored. The elevator climbed steadily toward the executive level, while rain tapped softly against the glass walls outside. The doors opened onto silence. The executive floor was dimly lit. Expensive wooden panels lined the hallways. The scent of cedar and fresh coffee lingered in the air. Ryan moved carefully, checking each corridor while Max padded quietly beside him. The alert signal pointed toward a private suite at the end of the hall. Emily Harrington's office. Ryan hesitated. Emily Harrington was one of the youngest CEOs in the country. Emily. At 32, she controlled a biotech empire worth billions. Magazine covers described her as brilliant, relentless, and impossible to intimidate. Employees spoke about her with equal parts admiration and fear. Ryan had interacted with her only a handful of times. She was tall and elegant, with long, dark brown hair usually pulled into a neat, professional style. Her pale skin and sharp green eyes gave her a striking appearance. She carried herself with confidence, but Ryan had occasionally noticed something unusual beneath that polished exterior. Tiny flashes of exhaustion, moments when she seemed to move more slowly than she should. The office door stood slightly open. A thin strip of warm light spilled into the hallway. Ryan knocked once. No response. The security alert still flashed on his tablet. He pushed the door open. What he saw froze him in place. Emily stood near a leather chair with her back partially turned toward him. For one stunned second, Ryan thought she had been attacked. White medical bandages wrapped around her ribs and lower torso. A large orthopedic brace covered most of her back. Bruises painted dark purple shadows across her side and shoulder. Fresh surgical tape disappeared beneath the edge of her blouse. The injuries looked severe, far worse than anything that could be explained by a simple accident. Emily spun around. Shock flashed across her face. For the first time since Ryan had met her, she looked vulnerable. Not like a billionaire, Not like a CEO, just a woman desperately trying to hide pain. Neither spoke. Ryan immediately looked away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Security alert." "I thought someone had broken in." Emily's breathing became shallow. For a moment, she looked as though she might collapse. Then the familiar corporate mask returned. Cold, controlled, untouchable. "You weren't supposed to see this." The words came out sharper than intended. Ryan nodded. "You're right." She tightened one hand against the edge of the desk. A flicker of pain crossed her face. Ryan noticed it instantly. Military training had made him observant. He recognized the signs of someone fighting through serious injuries. The realization unsettled him. Why would a woman with unlimited resources be hiding wounds like these? Why would nobody know? Max remained perfectly still, but his eyes never left Emily. The dog seemed unusually focused, as if he sensed something wasn't right. Emily followed Max's gaze and swallowed. For the first time, uncertainty appeared behind her green eyes. "Leave, Mr. Carter." Ryan stepped backward toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced once more at the brace, visible beneath her clothing. The device wasn't temporary support. It was the kind of medical equipment used after devastating trauma. He walked into the hallway and quietly closed the door. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Questions filled his mind. The injuries, the secrecy, the fear he had seen in her eyes. None of it made sense. Back in the security office, Ryan reviewed the incident report. The alert had disappeared. No trace remained, almost as if someone had erased it. He stared at the screen. Then his phone vibrated. An internal company message appeared. From Executive Office. "Mr. Carter, report directly to the chairwoman's private conference room at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Attendance is mandatory." Ryan read the message twice. Across the room, Max slowly lifted his head and let out a low growl toward the darkened monitor wall. And for the first time that night, Ryan had the uncomfortable feeling that whatever secret he had stumbled into was only the beginning. Ryan Carter barely slept that night. Long after leaving Harrington Biotech, he sat on the porch of his small Denver home with Max lying beside his chair, staring into the darkness while the events of the evening replayed endlessly in his mind. During his years as a Navy SEAL, Ryan had witnessed injuries that most people could not imagine. He had seen broken bones, burns, gunshot wounds, and the long road many warriors faced after surviving them. What unsettled him was not Emily Harrington's injuries themselves. It was the way she had tried to hide them. The woman the public viewed as one of the most powerful executives in America had looked genuinely frightened when he saw the brace beneath her clothes. That image refused to leave him. The following morning, Ryan arrived at company headquarters nearly 30 minutes early. Denver was waking beneath a pale sunrise, and the glass tower of Harrington Biotech reflected the first hints of gold across its surface. Max walked quietly at his side, through the executive entrance. The German Shepherd seemed unusually alert, his ears constantly moving as though listening for sounds nobody else could hear. Ryan had learned long ago to trust the dog's instincts. More than once during military deployments, Max had sensed danger before trained soldiers noticed anything unusual. The private conference room on the 50th floor overlooked most of downtown Denver. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across one wall, offering a view of highways, rooftops, and distant mountains. The room itself felt more like a private sanctuary than a corporate meeting space. Everything inside was expensive but understated, designed to communicate power without drawing attention to it. Ryan had only been waiting a few minutes when the door opened. Emily Harrington entered alone. At first glance, she looked exactly like the woman who appeared on magazine covers and business news programs. At 32, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions worth billions of dollars. Her dark brown hair rested neatly across her shoulders. Her green eyes were sharp and intelligent, and her charcoal gray business suit projected complete professionalism. Yet now that Ryan knew what was hidden beneath that image, he noticed details others would miss. She moved carefully. Her posture remained perfectly straight, almost unnaturally so. Every motion seemed deliberate, as though one careless movement might trigger pain. Emily closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not hostile. It felt more like two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge, both uncertain whether to cross. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter," she finally said. Ryan nodded. "You made it sound important." A faint smile touched her lips, before disappearing. "It is." She placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward him. Ryan opened it and immediately recognized his own employment records. Security certifications, military history, performance evaluations, commendations, and background reports filled the pages. Emily had clearly spent part of the night learning everything she could about him. "You've been busy," Ryan said. "I needed to know whether I could trust you." The directness of her answer surprised him. Emily folded her hands together. For a moment, she seemed to be choosing her next words carefully. Ryan noticed subtle tension in her face. The woman sitting across from him was accustomed to controlling every conversation, yet this one appeared different. "What you saw last night was never supposed to become public knowledge," she said. "Very few people know the truth." "I'm work." Ryan remained silent and allowed her to continue. 3 months ago, Emily explained, she had been traveling to inspect a research facility in Washington state when her helicopter crashed in the Cascade Mountains. The official reports described the incident as minor. News outlets had reported that she suffered only temporary injuries and quickly recovered. The reality was very different. Multiple ribs had been shattered. Her lower spine had been severely damaged. Several surgeries had followed. Although she was recovering, her doctors still required her to wear specialized orthopedic support beneath her clothing every day. As Emily spoke, Ryan began understanding why she guarded the secret so fiercely. Harrington Biotech was not merely a company. It was a massive corporation responsible for thousands of jobs, research programs, and investments around the world. The board of directors constantly evaluated leadership risks. If they learned the extent of her condition, they could legally remove her as CEO and install someone else in her place. "My father spent 30 years building this company," Emily said quietly. For the first time, genuine emotion appeared in her voice. "When he passed away, people assumed I would sell it, because I was too young to lead it. I've spent 6 years proving them wrong." Ryan studied her expression. He recognized the determination there. Many people viewed billionaires as individuals who never faced real hardship. Looking at Emily now, he saw something different. He saw a woman fighting to protect the legacy of someone she loved. "And now they think you're vulnerable," Ryan said. "They've thought that from the beginning." Emily stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Morning sunlight illuminated the Denver skyline behind her. For a few seconds, she appeared lost in thought. "The board doesn't trust me," she admitted. "Some members never have. If they discover how serious my injuries are, they will call an emergency vote before the end of the month." Do. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "So why bring me into this?" Emily turned toward him. "Because everyone around me has an agenda." She explained that lawyers answered to shareholders, executives protected their own careers, consultants followed money. Even some members of her security team reported information to people she did not fully trust. She needed someone outside that network, someone with military discipline, someone whose loyalty could not be purchased through stock options or board appointments. She needed someone like Ryan. Returning to the table, Emily opened a second folder and pushed it toward him. This one contained a formal employment contract. Ryan glanced at the numbers and immediately understood the seriousness of her offer. The compensation was several times higher than his current salary. The benefits were extraordinary. The position carried direct authority over executive protection and personal security operations. "I want you to become my personal security director." The position carried Director Badia, Emily said. "Officially, you'll oversee my protection detail. Unofficially, you'll help me keep this situation under control until I'm fully recovered." Ryan looked down at the contract again. It was enough money to change almost anyone's life. Yet something continued bothering him. "If this is only about protecting your medical privacy, why do I get the feeling there's more "You're not telling me." Emily's expression changed. The confidence remained, but something darker appeared beneath it. Without speaking, she reached into her briefcase and removed a photograph. She placed it on the table between them. The image showed twisted wreckage, scattered across a snow-covered mountainside. Ryan examined it carefully. A section of damaged metal had been circled with red ink. The official investigation blamed mechanical failure, Emily said. Ryan looked up. "And?" For several moments, Emily said nothing. Then she took a slow breath. "The lead investigator contacted me privately before he disappeared." Ryan felt every instinct sharpen at once. Emily's green eyes locked onto his. He believed someone sabotaged the helicopter. Ryan Carter accepted the new position before noon, but by sunset he already understood that Emily Harrington had not hired him for comfort. She had hired him because fear had begun moving through her life like a shadow with polished shoes. His first official task was simple on paper: review her security routes, private residence access logs, executive elevator activity, and all surveillance blind spots connected to the chairwoman's office. Yet Ryan had learned in war that simple things often hid the deepest rot. He spent the afternoon inside the security command center, his gray-blue eyes moving from screen to screen while Max lay near his chair, the German shepherd's ears twitching at every unusual sound from the hallway. The dog's powerful black and tan body remained still, but his amber eyes were restless, and Ryan knew that look well. Max was not relaxed. That meant Ryan could not be relaxed either. The first irregularity appeared in the executive elevator logs. 3 times during the past month, someone had accessed the 50th floor after midnight, using a temporary maintenance credential. Yet no maintenance request existed for those dates. The second irregularity was worse. 2 hallway cameras near Emily's private office had gone offline for precisely 4 minutes on the same nights the badge was used. 4 minutes was not long enough for a casual malfunction, but it was more than enough time for someone to enter, search a desk, plant a listening device, or remove a file. Ryan called in the night shift supervisor, a thin, nervous man named Greg Palmer, who was in his late 40s, with thinning, sandy hair, damp-looking skin, and the defeated posture of someone who had spent too many years obeying people he secretly disliked. Greg insisted the outages were ordinary system glitches, but his eyes kept sliding toward the door, as if he expected someone more important to appear and rescue him from the conversation. Ryan did not accuse him. He simply listened. That was something many men forgot how to do after they left the military. But Ryan had always believed silence could frighten a liar more than shouting ever could. Greg finally admitted that outside contractors had been inside the building twice without full registration, both times approved through the office of a senior board liaison. He could not provide names. He claimed the paperwork had been handled upstairs, a phrase Ryan had heard too many times in corporate life. It usually meant responsibility had been buried under expensive stationery. By early evening, Ryan escorted Emily from the building to her private vehicle. She wore a cream wool coat over a dark navy dress, her hair pinned neatly behind her head, her face composed with the icy elegance the public expected from her. To the people in the lobby, she appeared untouchable. To Ryan, walking half a step behind her, she looked like a woman balancing a crown made of glass. Every few steps, her right hand moved almost imperceptibly toward her ribs before she forced it back to her side. He noticed the way she inhaled shallowly, the way her jaw tightened when the marble floor changed to the uneven stone outside. She never asked for help. That, Ryan thought, was part pride and part terror. Quote, "People who had been betrayed often found it easier to endure pain than accept another person's hand." Her driver that evening was Victor Hale, a compact man in his early 60s, with silver hair combed flat against his head, brown skin weathered by age and sun, and careful dark eyes that seemed to measure every passing face. Victor had driven for the Harrington family since Emily was a child, and unlike most employees in the building, he looked at her, not with fear or ambition, but with quiet worry. He greeted Ryan politely, then gave Max a respectful nod, as if he understood that the dog was not decoration. As the black SUV moved through downtown traffic, Ryan watched the side mirrors, and noticed a dark sedan 3 cars back make the same turns for nearly 12 blocks. It kept its distance well, but not well enough. When Ryan instructed Victor to change routes without warning, the sedan hesitated, missed the turn, then reappeared 2 blocks later. Emily noticed Ryan watching the mirror. "You see it too," she said, keeping her voice calm. Ryan did not look away from the glass. Dark sedan, tinted windows, Colorado plates, same vehicle since we left the garage. She sat very still. For all her money and intelligence, there was something deeply human in the way her fingers tightened around the leather seat. Ryan asked Victor to take a longer route through an older neighborhood lined with brick apartment buildings and narrow side streets. The sedan followed for another mile before finally turning away. Emily said nothing for several minutes, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its corporate sharpness. She told Ryan that strange cars had appeared near her house twice since the crash, but her previous security director had dismissed them as paparazzi or investors hoping for a glimpse of weakness. Ryan did not like that answer. Paparazzi chased attention. Professionals avoided it. Emily's residence sat behind iron gates in a quiet part of Cherry Creek, a modern stone and glass home softened by old trees, and a small garden her father had planted years before his death. Inside, the house was beautiful but lonely, with high ceilings, polished floors, and artwork that looked expensive enough to make ordinary laughter feel out of place. Ryan conducted a perimeter check while Max searched the garden path, the service entrance, and the shadows beneath the rear terrace. Near the east fence, Max suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, his nose lowered, and a low rumble formed deep in his chest. Ryan crouched beside him and found a partial shoe print pressed into damp soil beneath the hedges. Whoever had stood there had chosen a spot outside the main camera angle, close enough to watch Emily's bedroom windows. When Ryan showed Emily the photograph of the print, the color drained slightly from her face. She was standing in the living room near the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel, as though the long day had finally reached her bones. In that moment, Ryan saw past the CEO again. He saw a tired woman in pain, carrying a secret too heavy for one pair of shoulders. She tried to dismiss the discovery with a practiced line about wealthy people attracting unstable strangers, but her voice betrayed her. Ryan told her the truth without softening it. Someone had studied her property, her schedule, and her habits. Someone had known exactly where the cameras failed to see. Later that night, Emily's pain became too severe to hide. She turned away from Ryan in the hallway, but her knees weakened before she reached the stairs. Ryan caught her by the arm before she fell, careful not to grip too hard. For one fierce second, she looked ready to order him out of the house, but the command never came. Pride and fear battled across her face, and fear lost. She allowed him to guide her to a chair near the library window. Under the warm lamp, with Max sitting like a silent guardian beside them, Emily looked younger than 32, and much lonelier than any billionaire should have looked. She confessed that she had stopped sleeping through the night after the crash. Every unfamiliar sound made her think of twisting metal, snow, and the smell of burning fuel. Ryan did not interrupt. He simply listened. And for the first time since hiring him, Emily seemed to understand that silence from him was not judgment. It was shelter. Before midnight, Ryan found the third sign. It was hidden behind a decorative vent in Emily's private study, a small wireless device, no larger than a coin, placed where it could capture conversations from the desk and transmit them beyond the house. Emily stared at it, as if it were a spider pulled from her own pillow. Ryan sealed it in an evidence bag and asked who had entered the room since the crash. Her answer was quiet. Too many people. Doctors, lawyers, board representatives, trusted staff. The list itself was the danger. As Ryan turned the device over under the desk lamp, Max suddenly moved to the window and growled toward the dark street beyond the gates. A black SUV sat beneath the trees across the road with its headlights off, and when Ryan stepped closer to the glass, the vehicle's engine started. It rolled away slowly, not fast enough to look frightened, not slow enough to look innocent. Emily stood beside him, pale and silent, and Ryan realized their trust had begun in the worst possible way, not with comfort, but with proof that someone had already gotten too close.
The discovery of the listening device changed everything. Until that moment, Ryan Carter had been working with suspicions, scattered clues, and instincts sharpened by years of military service. Now he possessed proof that someone had crossed the line from observation into active surveillance. Whoever was targeting Emily Harrington was not merely watching from a distance. They were inside her world, listening to conversations, studying routines, and gathering information with patience that suggested planning rather than curiosity. The following morning, Ryan arrived at Harrington Biotech before most employees entered the building. The glass tower looked peaceful from the outside, glowing beneath the early Colorado sun, but he had learned that danger rarely announced itself with noise. Sometimes it wore expensive suits and sat in executive boardrooms. Max accompanied him into the security center. The German Shepherd seemed energized, almost as if the previous night's discoveries had activated the instincts that years of training had built into him. Ryan spent several hours tracing access records connected to the listening device. The equipment itself was sophisticated, far beyond anything a casual intruder would use. Eventually, a pattern emerged. Multiple security exceptions, contractor clearances, and maintenance authorizations all led back to a single department responsible for coordinating communications between executive leadership and the board of directors. The name attached to many of those approvals was Richard Caldwell. Ryan had heard of him before. Nearly everyone inside the company had. Richard Caldwell was 64 years old, tall and lean, with silver hair, pale blue eyes, and the polished confidence of a man who had spent decades accumulating influence. As one of the largest shareholders and longest-serving board members, he carried tremendous power within Harrington Biotech. Employees described him as brilliant but ruthless. Several former executives had quietly disappeared from the company after disagreements with him. No scandals had ever been proven, but his reputation traveled ahead of him wherever he went. Ryan printed every record he found and carried them directly to Emily. She was alone in her office when he arrived. Sunlight poured through the windows behind her desk, but exhaustion lingered beneath her carefully maintained appearance. The previous weeks had clearly taken their toll. Although her posture remained disciplined, Ryan noticed the faint tension around her eyes and the controlled way she moved whenever she stood up. When he placed the documents on her desk, Emily studied them silently. The longer she read, the more serious her expression became. "Richard has wanted control of this company for years," she finally said. Ryan pulled a chair closer. "Why?" Emily looked toward the city beyond the windows before answering. "Because my father never trusted him." She explained that Richard had joined the company decades earlier as an investor. Over time, he accumulated enormous influence, often pushing for aggressive expansion strategies that prioritized profits above research ethics. Emily's father repeatedly blocked several of those initiatives. After his death, Richard apparently expected Emily to become a figurehead who could be manipulated. Instead, she strengthened company oversight, increased transparency, and rejected several projects that would have generated enormous profits but carried significant risks. Ryan listened carefully. Personal disagreements could explain corporate conflict. They could not explain a helicopter crash. 2 days later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. A woman named Laura Bennett requested a confidential meeting. Laura was in her early 40s, with shoulder-length auburn hair, intelligent hazel eyes, and the cautious demeanor of someone accustomed to looking over her shoulder. She had worked as an aviation maintenance analyst for nearly 15 years and had previously assisted investigators reviewing transportation accidents. According to Emily, Laura had briefly worked alongside the lead investigator who examined the helicopter crash. The meeting took place in a private conference room away from the main executive floors. Laura looked nervous from the moment she entered. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a thick envelope on the table. "I shouldn't even be here," she admitted. Ryan noticed that she repeatedly glanced toward the door. People did not behave that way unless fear had become part of their daily routine. Laura explained that the lead investigator had contacted her shortly before disappearing. He had been troubled by evidence recovered from the wreckage. Specifically, he believed a critical component within the helicopter's control system had been deliberately altered shortly before the flight. He never filed the report, Laura said quietly. Why not? Ryan asked. Because he said someone higher up was pressuring him to classify everything as mechanical failure. The room became silent. Laura opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, engineering notes, maintenance records, and copies of private emails. Individually, none of the documents proved sabotage. Together, they painted a deeply disturbing picture. Several maintenance inspections had been overridden. Replacement parts had been approved through unusual channels. Important records had vanished shortly after the crash. Ryan reviewed everything carefully. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone had been preparing the aircraft for failure. Later that evening, Ryan and Emily reviewed the evidence inside her residence. The mood was far different from their first conversations. Trust had gradually replaced suspicion. Emily no longer treated Ryan as merely an employee. Ryan no longer viewed Emily as an untouchable billionaire hidden behind corporate walls. Shared danger had stripped away many of those illusions. As they worked through the files, Max suddenly lifted his head. The German Shepherd moved toward the front windows. His posture immediately changed. Ryan stood. Outside the property gates, a black SUV sat parked beneath a row of trees. The same vehicle. Again. This time, it remained longer, almost as if the people inside wanted them to know they were being watched. Ryan memorized the license plate before the vehicle finally pulled away. The next morning produced the most dangerous development yet. Emily received formal notice that an emergency board meeting would take place in 3 days. The stated purpose involved reviewing leadership stability during an upcoming corporate merger worth billions of dollars. On the surface, the meeting appeared routine. Ryan immediately recognized it for what it really was: a test. Someone was preparing to challenge Emily's authority. Perhaps they believed she was already weak. Perhaps they believed their secrets remained hidden. Either way, the timing was no coincidence. That afternoon, Ryan received confirmation that the black SUV belonged to a private security company, frequently employed by businesses connected to Richard Caldwell. The evidence remained circumstantial, but the circle was tightening. As sunset painted Denver in shades of gold and orange, Ryan stood in Emily's office reviewing the latest findings. Emily remained unusually quiet as she read through the documents gathered from Laura Bennett. Finally, she looked up. "If we're right," she said softly, "then someone tried to kill me." Ryan met her gaze. For the first time since this ordeal began, neither of them looked away. The truth had become impossible to avoid. Somewhere within the company, powerful people had spent months hiding a crime. And in 3 days, many of those people would gather together in the same boardroom. The morning of the emergency board meeting arrived under a pale Denver sky, the kind of sky that made the glass tower of Harrington Biotech look less like a building and more like a blade rising out of the city. Ryan Carter stood beside the private elevator with Max at his left side, watching every reflection in the polished walls. He wore the same calm expression he had carried through deserts, storms, and battlefields. But inside, every instinct in him was awake. Emily Harrington was due to face the board in less than 20 minutes, and the people who had tried to bury the truth would be sitting across from her with clean hands, expensive watches, and practiced smiles. Emily arrived dressed in a deep navy suit that concealed the medical brace beneath her jacket. Her dark brown hair was pulled back neatly, and her green eyes held a quiet determination that reminded Ryan of a candle refusing to go out in the wind. She was still injured, still in pain, and still walking into a room full of people who believed they could break her. Yet there was something different about her now. She no longer looked like a woman protecting a secret alone. She looked like a woman carrying the truth to its rightful altar. When Ryan asked if she was ready, she looked toward the closed boardroom doors and said, "No, but I'm going in anyway." Inside the boardroom, Richard Caldwell sat near the head of the long table, as if the seat already belonged to him. The 64-year-old board member looked polished and controlled, with silver hair combed perfectly back, pale blue eyes, and a thin mouth that seemed built for judgment rather than kindness. Around him sat several directors, lawyers, and senior executives, most of them watching Emily with the cautious interest of people waiting to see whether a wounded queen would stumble. One new face in the room was Margaret Sloan, the company's outside legal counsel, a tall woman in her late 50s with short gray blonde hair, sharp features, and the dry patience of someone who had spent decades watching powerful men underestimate evidence. She gave Ryan a brief nod as he entered, and he understood that she already knew enough to be useful. Richard opened the meeting with a voice smooth enough to sound almost sympathetic. He spoke about leadership stability, shareholder confidence, medical transparency, and the responsibility of the board to protect the future of Harrington Biotech. The words were dressed as concern, but Ryan heard the knife beneath them. Emily sat quietly through most of it, her hands folded on the table, her posture controlled despite the pain tightening around her ribs. Max lay near Ryan's feet, calm but alert, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the room. When Richard finally suggested a temporary transfer of executive authority, several board members shifted in their seats. They had expected Emily to argue. They had expected anger. They had not expected her to open a folder and slide copies of aviation records, security logs, contractor clearances, and surveillance reports across the table. Emily spoke slowly, not because she was weak, but because every word carried weight. She explained that her helicopter crash had not been a simple mechanical failure. She described altered maintenance records, deleted inspection notes, unauthorized contractor approvals, the disappearance of the lead investigator, and the listening device found inside her private study. She did not accuse Richard immediately. Instead, she let the evidence walk across the room first, patient and merciless. Ryan watched the faces around the table change as the directors realized this was no longer a meeting about removing an injured CEO. It was becoming a record of a crime. Richard tried to interrupt, but Margaret Sloan stopped him with a raised hand and a voice as cold as winter glass. She informed the board that copies of the documents had already been delivered to federal investigators earlier that morning. That was the moment the room truly changed. Power, Ryan knew, often depended on the belief that no one outside the room was watching. When powerful people realized the walls had ears beyond their control, their courage thinned quickly. One of Richard's allies, a heavy-set director named Alan Pierce, a red-faced man in his early 60s with thinning black hair and nervous hands, began sweating through his collar. He had spent years smiling beside Richard at charity dinners, but fear made him look suddenly smaller. Then Ryan placed one final file on the table. It contained photographs from Laura Bennett, payment records connecting Richard's private business accounts to the security company that had followed Emily, and a recovered message from the missing investigator warning that the crash evidence had been deliberately suppressed. The room fell silent as Margaret read the message aloud. Emily's expression did not change, but Ryan saw her fingers tremble once before she steadied them. This was the moment she had been afraid to reach, because proof brought justice. But it also confirmed the terrible truth. Someone she had trusted inside her father's company had wanted her dead. The boardroom doors opened before Richard could speak again. 2 federal agents entered with building security behind them. The first agent was Daniel Reeves, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with close-cropped black hair, a trimmed beard, and tired brown eyes that suggested he had seen greed ruin too many families. Beside him stood Agent Claire Whitman, a composed woman around 40 with dark skin, braided hair pinned neatly at the back, and a firm, steady manner that made even wealthy men sit straighter. They identified themselves, presented warrants, and asked Richard Caldwell to stand. Richard's face hardened, then cracked into disbelief, as if consequences were an insult invented for poorer people. Alan Pierce tried to speak, but Claire Whitman quietly advised him to wait for his attorney. Emily remained seated as the agents escorted Richard from the room. She did not smile. Ryan respected that. Revenge might have made a louder person celebrate, but Emily seemed to understand that justice could still hurt. Her father's company had been infected by betrayal, and survival did not erase the wound. When Richard passed her chair, he looked down at her and said she would never hold the company together. Emily looked up with calm green eyes and answered, "My father built this company with people who believed in healing. You only believed in ownership." It was the first time Ryan had heard her voice sound free. The months that followed were not easy, but they were honest. Federal investigators uncovered a wider network of fraud, illegal surveillance, and financial manipulation connected to the attempt to force Emily out. Several executives resigned before they could be removed. Others faced charges. The missing investigator was eventually found alive in protective custody, having gone into hiding after receiving threats against his family. Emily underwent another surgery and began a long course of physical therapy. Some days she walked with visible pain, and some days the old fear returned when a helicopter passed overhead, but she no longer hid behind locked doors and silence. Ryan stayed. At first, he told himself it was because the company still needed protection. Later, as winter softened into spring, he admitted the truth was more complicated. He had seen Emily at her most powerful and at her most broken, and somewhere between the boardroom and the hospital corridors, respect had become loyalty. Max seemed to understand this before Ryan did. The German shepherd followed Emily through the halls with the devotion of an old guardian, and more than once, employees smiled at the sight of the billionaire chairwoman pausing to scratch his ears before entering meetings that once would have terrified her. 6 months after Richard Caldwell's arrest, Emily stood beside Ryan at the opening ceremony of the Harrington Veterans Recovery Foundation, a new program created to provide medical care, job placement, housing assistance, and trauma support for veterans and their families. The building was smaller than the glass tower downtown, but it felt warmer. Sunlight poured through wide windows onto fresh wooden floors, and outside, volunteers planted young trees in memory of those who had come home carrying invisible wounds. Emily walked with care, but without the heavy brace. Ryan stood beside her, tall and quiet, wearing no medals, and asking for no praise. When she introduced him as the Foundation's executive director, the applause rose around them like a tide. After the ceremony, Emily found Ryan near the garden, where Max rested under a newly planted maple tree. She looked at the building, then at the dog, then finally at Ryan. "You walked into the wrong room one night," she said softly. Ryan smiled, his gray-blue eyes warmed by something he had not felt in years. "Maybe it was the right room," he answered. Emily looked away toward the mountains, where the afternoon sun turned the clouds gold. For the first time since the crash, she did not look hunted. She looked like a woman who had survived the fire and chosen to build a lighthouse from the ashes.
Before you go, remember this. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't arrive as lightning from the sky. Sometimes they arrive through ordinary people who choose courage when fear would be easier, kindness when bitterness would be justified, and truth when silence would be safer. Ryan thought he was simply doing his job that night. Emily thought she was fighting her battle alone. But God often places people in our path for a reason we cannot see at the time. A wrong turn, a closed door, a chance meeting. Sometimes, these moments become the beginning of a miracle. In our own lives, we all face storms, hidden wounds, and battles that others never see. This story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God may already be preparing help hope, and healing just around the corner. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what part of the story moved you most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace to your home, and guide your steps in the days ahead. Amen.